He wasn't a drifter passing through. He was a neighbor. He went to their church. He ran for governor. Twice. A 12-year-old girl vanished from inside her own home, 5 days before Christmas. No scream, no struggle, just her shoes, left sitting by the couch. For 35 years, nothing. Then a bulldozer hit her bones in a field. And here's what makes this one different. The killer never ran. He never hid the way killers hide. He just talked. For 37 years he could not stop talking, and every single word tightened the rope around his own neck. Her name was Jonelle Matthews, 12 years old, a choir kid, loud, funny, dramatic, in the best way, the kind of kid who lit up a room. That night, she'd performed in a holiday concert, Christmas carols, her whole choir. Her friend's dad drove her home after. 8:15 p.m., she got out of the car, said goodbye, wished them Merry Christmas, walked up the driveway, and here's the small-town detail that breaks your heart. They waited in the car. They watched her go in. Then the foyer light flicked on. That was the signal. I'm inside. I'm safe. So they drove away. That man was the last person to see Jonelle alive, other than the one who took her. Now, 8:30 p.m., the phone rings inside the house. Jonelle answers it. It's a teacher, calling about her dad's school. She takes a polite little message. Totally normal, completely ordinary. That phone call is the last time anyone heard her voice. After that, silence. Whatever happened in that house happened between 8:30 and 9:30, and it happened fast. Her dad, Jim, comes home around 9:30. He'd been at his older daughter's game. Mom was out of state, caring for her own mother. So Jim walks in, expecting to find Jonelle. The house is warm, the heater's running, the TV's still playing. Her shawl's draped over the couch, like she just took it off. Her shoes are sitting neatly on the floor, right next to the Christmas tree. Everything says she's there. Everything says she was here a second ago. But she's not. The heater's still warm, the shoes are still warm, but the girl who wore them is gone. Jim doesn't panic at first. Maybe a friend's house, right? He starts calling around. Nobody's seen her. 10 p.m. His other daughter comes home, calls out her name. No answer. That's when the fear hits. He calls the Greeley police. They're there in 15 minutes. And then they step outside, and every officer feels a chill. Footprints. In the fresh snow. Right outside the living room window. Someone had been standing there, watching, peering inside. And these weren't a child's footprints. Too big, too deliberate. Now, here's the part that gets under your skin. Someone tried to erase those prints. With a garden rake, the family's own rake, pulled right out of their garage. No forced entry, no broken windows, no screams, no struggle. This wasn't random. This was someone who'd been watching, someone who knew that house, someone who waited for the exact moment. A 12-year-old girl was completely alone. So police do what police do. They look at the family first. They look at Jim, and Jim cooperates, fully. He takes a lie detector test. The FBI's top interrogator runs it, and they tell him he failed. Think about that for 1 second. Your daughter is missing. You're terrified, and the people meant to find her are accusing you. But Jim kept telling the truth, over and over. Eventually, they cleared him, and that left them with nothing. No suspect, no body, no leads. Now here's where it gets colder. Those footprints weren't just there. Someone had tried to erase them, dragged over, smeared out. A clear attempt to hide them, and police figured out the tool, a garden rake. Not one the intruder brought, the family's own rake, pulled from the Matthews' own garage. Sit with that for a second. This person stood at the window, then walked to the garage. Found the rake, used it, tried to wipe themselves out of the snow. That is not fear. That is not impulse. That is someone covering tracks, with the family's own tools. Someone who took their time. Now, the investigators saw that rake. They understood exactly what it meant. It meant whoever did this knew the property, knew where the garage was, knew what was inside it, and they made a quiet decision, a decision that would matter for the next 35 years. They would not tell the public about the rake, not the press, not the neighbors, not the volunteers searching the fields. The raked footprints became a secret, held back, on purpose. You don't need to understand why yet, just hold on to it. The rake, the snow, a detail almost nobody knew, because that one quiet decision is the reason this case would eventually break wide open. That rake detail, police buried it on purpose, and one day, the wrong person would say it out loud. Before we go further, quick thing, this channel doesn't just tell you what happened. We tell you what investigators held back, the details they hide on purpose, the ones that crack a case wide open. So subscribe right now, because in Chapter 4, one of those hidden details ends this entire mystery. And you're going to want to be here when it does. When a child vanishes, investigators start close to home, not because they're cruel, because that's where the answers usually are. Most missing kids were taken by someone they knew, so the first hard question points straight at the family. And in this case, that question landed on her father, Jim Matthews. Here's what you need to understand about Jim. He didn't push back. He didn't lawyer up. He cooperated, completely. Police asked him to take a polygraph. He agreed. And this wasn't a routine test. It was run by an FBI specialist, one of their top examiners in the region, the kind they bring in for major cases. Jim sat down, he answered the questions, and the result came back. They told him he'd failed. Now think about his position. His daughter is missing. Days are passing. The trail is cold. And the people meant to find her are now looking at him. He didn't walk away. He took a second test, this one with local police, answered the questions again, told the same story again, and eventually, investigators cleared him. He was not their suspect. The father was a dead end, which sounds like progress. It wasn't, because clearing him left them with nothing, no name, no lead, no direction. So they reopened the most basic question: what if she left on her own? The runaway theory. On paper, it's the easy explanation. A 12-year-old, maybe upset, maybe gone willingly. But you don't just assume that. You test it. And police did. They went through her school locker. They searched her bedroom. They looked for the things a runaway leaves behind. A note, a missing bag, clothes pulled from the closet, money taken, a plan. There was nothing like that. And the calendar argued against it too. She had a sleepover planned for the next day. She was set to perform at church. It was 5 days before Christmas. The presents were already waiting. None of that is the profile of a kid running away. Then weeks passed, then months, and a runaway turns up. A runaway calls home. Jonelle did neither. The theory didn't just weaken, it collapsed entirely. So investigators kept widening the circle. If it wasn't the immediate family, what about her past? Jonelle had been adopted as a baby, and that opened a question. Her biological mother, a woman named Terry, could she have come back? Could she have wanted the child she gave up? Police took it seriously. They placed Terry under surveillance, for weeks, watching, waiting for a slip. And here's what they found. Nothing. Terry hadn't been in contact with the family, not in years. She didn't even know Jonelle was missing. Another lead, another wall. By now, the case had outgrown the town. It wasn't just a Greeley story anymore. The search went national, and it did so in a way that had almost never been done before. Jonelle's face was printed on milk cartons. She was among the first children in America ever featured that way. Stop and think about what that meant in 1984. No Amber Alerts, no internet, no phone in every pocket. The way you searched for a missing child was to put her face on something in every kitchen in the country, millions of households, every morning. A 12-year-old girl from Colorado, staring back over breakfast. And it climbed higher than that. In 1985, the President of the United States spoke about missing children in America. Ronald Reagan named her Jonelle Matthews, a case from a small Colorado town mentioned by the most powerful man alive. National attention, presidential attention, and still, not one lead that went anywhere. This is the part that's hard to absorb. The case had everything: a cooperative family, cleared suspects, a scene worked by investigators, coverage most cases never get, and it produced no answer. So time did what time does. It moved. 5 years passed. The phone stopped ringing with tips. 10 years passed, and in 1994, her parents made a decision no parent should face. They had Jonelle declared legally dead, not because they'd given up hope, because a decade had given them no choice. 10 years, no body, no suspect, no motive. There was one moment in those years, one that looked like it might be something. In 1985, on farmland in Weld County, human remains were found, a small piece, discovered on the open land. And for a moment, investigators wondered, could this be Jonelle? It was examined, it was tested, and the answer came back. It wasn't her. The one physical lead in years ruled out. And that's the pattern of this entire decade. Every door they opened closed in their face. The father cleared. The runaway theory collapsed. The birth mother ruled out. The remains in the field, not her. National coverage, no result. By every normal measure, this case was unsolvable. Cold isn't a strong enough word. This case was frozen solid. For 35 years, the ground kept her secret. Then, in 2019, a machine cut into a field 15 miles away, and the ground gave her back. The break in this case didn't come from a detective. It didn't come from a tip. It didn't come from a confession. It came from a machine, by accident. July 2019. A construction crew is laying pipeline. Oil and gas. Routine work. The site is a stretch of rural farmland. Weld County. About 15 miles from Greeley. Open. Remote. Forgotten ground. These men have no idea what's beneath them. To them, it's just dirt. Just another day on the job. Then the equipment turns over the soil, and the crew stops, because they've found human remains. Now, here's where the work begins. Finding remains is not the same as solving anything. You can't just assume who it is, not after 35 years. So the identification had to be airtight, and the evidence at the scene started speaking immediately. First, the teeth. The skull still had orthodontic braces attached. That's not a small detail. Braces are specific. Braces are documented. A dentist keeps records of that exact work. Second, the clothing. Pieces of fabric were still present, and those pieces matched a description, the exact outfit Jonelle was last seen wearing, the clothes from the night she disappeared. But matching clothes isn't proof, so investigators didn't stop there. They went to the hard science, dental records, then DNA, and both came back the same. The remains were Jonelle Matthews. After 35 years, she had been found. But finding her answered one question and opened a far darker one. Up to this point, this had always been a missing persons case, a girl who vanished. The remains changed that instantly. Because the examination revealed a cause of death, a single gunshot wound. Let that register. This was not an accident. This was not a child who wandered off. This was a homicide. The case file changed that day. Missing person became murder, and the way she was found told investigators even more. This wasn't a body left in the open. She had been buried, out in that remote field, deliberately, carefully. The position of the remains was documented. The clothing, the wrapping, the placement, all of it recorded as evidence. And the picture it painted was clear. Whoever did this took the time to drive her here, 15 miles from her home, to a field most people would never find. This was not panic. This was concealment. Someone wanted her to stay hidden, and for 35 years it worked. So now the police had a homicide. They had remains. They had a location. What they didn't have was a name. But that was about to change. Fast. Because just weeks after the discovery, the Greeley Police Department made an announcement, and it stopped the whole town cold. They had a person of interest, and here's what nobody expected. It wasn't a drifter. It wasn't a stranger passing through in 1984. It wasn't some unknown face. It was a man who had lived right there, in Greeley, 2 miles from the Matthews home, a man who went to the same church, sat in the same pews, part of the same small community. A man who, in the years since, had run for public office, who had campaigned for governor. Someone visible, someone known, someone who had been in plain sight the entire time. His name was Stephen Pankey. So who was Stephen Pankey in 1984? Let me give you just one fact for now. 1. The day before Jonelle disappeared, Pankey was arrested. The charges, harassment and trespass. And his life was falling apart. His business had collapsed. His finances were in freefall. A man under pressure, a man with a bad day on the record. The day before a 12-year-old vanished, 2 miles from his home. Now, I want to be careful here. An arrest is not a murder. Living nearby is not a crime. On its own, none of this convicts anyone. But this is where the story turns, because of what Pankey did next. For decades, police didn't find Pankey by chasing him. They found him because, for 37 years, he kept running toward them. Here's what people do when they want to disappear. Nothing. They stay quiet. They keep their head down. They don't draw a single eye. Stephen Pankey did the opposite. For decades, he did the opposite, and it started within days of Jonelle going missing. Let's walk through that first week. One thing at a time. Pankey suddenly announced a trip. The family was leaving town. Before daylight the next morning. Destination, California, to see his parents. According to his then-wife, this trip was not planned. It was sudden, rushed, out of nowhere. That's beat 1. Now watch what happens on the drive, because there's something you need to know about that household. Pankey ran what he called a godly home, and in that home, media was banned. No television, no radio, no newspapers, no music. His wife wasn't even allowed to drive. That's the level of control we're talking about. So remember that rule. No media, none. And then, on the way home, Pankey broke his own rule. He ordered the radio turned on. He wanted the news. Specifically, news about a missing girl. His wife flipped through stations for hours while he listened, waiting for any word on Jonelle Matthews. That's beat 2. They get back to town, and he doesn't go home. He goes to a store first. He buys every local newspaper he can find. Then he has his wife read the articles aloud, every article about the disappearance. Not once, 3 times each. That's beat 3. And the week isn't over. Within days, Pankey starts digging, in his own front yard. He says it's a septic tank problem, but here's the issue with that. The septic tank was nearly new. It had been replaced that same year. There was no problem to fix. That's beat 4. And then the last one, the strangest of all. A car on his property caught fire. His wife went out to check it, and she found Pankey standing beside it, holding a shovel. Now line all of that up. A sudden trip, A broken media ban, newspapers read 3 times over, unexplained digging, a burning car, all of it, inside 1 week. And here is the part that defies logic. About a month after Jonelle vanished, Stephen Pankey contacted law enforcement. Himself. He didn't wait to be questioned. He walked toward the investigation. He claimed to be a minister. He said he'd received information through a confession. He said he could help solve the case. But there was a condition. He wanted immunity first. Police didn't give it to him, but they wrote his name down, and they remembered it. And this, right here, becomes the pattern of his entire life. He doesn't avoid the case. He attaches himself to it. Over and over and over. Because Pankey didn't stop after 1984. He moved away from Colorado. He built a life in another state. But Jonelle Matthews came with him. In his words, in his writing. Over the years, Pankey wrote constantly. Letters, legal filings, petitions. And tucked inside those documents about completely unrelated matters, were references to Jonelle Matthews. When investigators eventually searched his home, they found the scale of it. Over 1,000 documents, mentioning her. 1,000. And some of those writings were impossible to explain away. In one court filing, Pankey wrote that he feared the death penalty. The death penalty for what? For revealing the location of a body. He put that in writing, in an official legal document. There was also a manuscript, a book he'd written. The title, Graveyards. And inside it, page after page of hatred, aimed at the church, the same congregation tied to this community. And then there was the church itself. After Jonelle disappeared, a minister stood before the congregation. He said he believed she'd be found alive. The room wanted to believe it. They prayed for it. Pankey stood up, and he shouted him down. He called the minister a false prophet. He had to be removed. A man insisting, loudly, angrily, that hope was wrong. I'm not going to tell you what that means. I'm just going to let it sit there. Now stop for 1 second, because what I'm about to tell you is the single piece that holds this entire case together. And this is exactly the kind of detail we live for on this channel. The fact that everyone overlooked for 35 years. The one that changes everything. If that's the true crime you want, evidence, not guesswork, subscribe right now before this reveal, because here it comes. Go back to Chapter 1, the footprints in the snow, the ones raked over with the family's own rake. Remember what I told you? Police never released that detail. Not to the press, not to the public. It was hold-back evidence, information only 2 groups could know. The investigators and whoever stood at that window. That detail stayed sealed for years, and then it surfaced. In Pankey's own handwriting, his then-wife found a note in the trash. On it, written by him, a reference to the snow at the Matthews house being raked. Read that again in your head. A secret only the killer should have known. Written down by Stephen Pankey. And here's the part that seals it. His own defense attorney, the man whose job was to defend him, later admitted the truth, that the rake is arguably the one piece of evidence that ties Pankey to this crime. Because there was no innocent way for him to know it. None. But knowing a secret isn't the same as a conviction. To put Stephen Pankey away, prosecutors needed him to do the one thing he'd done his whole life. Keep talking. And in a courtroom, under oath, he did exactly that. Walk into that courtroom as a prosecutor for a second, and look at what you actually have. You have a man, you have a pattern, you have a secret he should never have known. But now look at what you don't have. No DNA. After 35 years in the ground, the remains gave investigators nothing usable. No weapon. The gun was never recovered. No fingerprints. No physical link at all. In most murder trials, That's where the case falls apart. But this case was different from the start, because the entire prosecution would be built on one thing: Stephen Pankey's own words and his own behavior. That's it. That's the case. The first trial began in 2021. And the prosecution went big. They called around 60 witnesses. One by one, they walked the jury through decades of Pankey's conduct: the letters, the filings, the obsession, the detail he never should have known. But the witness who mattered most was the person who'd lived beside him, his ex-wife. She had watched it all up close, and she told the jury something new, something from years after the disappearance. In 2008, Pankey's own son died. And at the funeral, standing over his son's remains, Pankey leaned in, and he said he hoped this hadn't happened because of Jonelle Matthews, his son's funeral, and the name on his mind was hers. The jury heard that, in her words, under oath. But the most damaging witness in that first trial wasn't a witness at all. It was Pankey himself. Against every piece of legal advice, Stephen Pankey took the stand. His own defense didn't want it. He did it anyway. And what followed was rambling, contradictory, hard to follow. He admitted he had lied for years. He said he'd made things up, out of bitterness. So his entire defense came down to this: yes, I've lied for decades, but I'm not lying now. Then the prosecutor stood up and asked him a direct question. He asked Pankey about the moment of the shooting, about whether Jonelle had begged, and Pankey didn't answer. The jury took it all in: the conduct, the contradictions, the silence. And then they deadlocked. They could not reach a unanimous verdict. The judge declared a mistrial. After everything, the case did not end. So the prosecution prepared to do it again, a second trial. The next year, but this time they had something new: a witness who had never spoken before, a man who'd been held in the same jail unit as Pankey. The two had spent time together. They'd prayed together, talked. And one day, Pankey said he needed forgiveness. He told the man he had done bad things. The man asked if it was about Jonelle. Pankey didn't deny it. And then, another day, through the wall of the cell, the man heard Pankey say something. A short, plain statement that she was dead before he had even crossed the railroad tracks. Think about what that sentence contains: a location, a sequence, a certainty, the words of someone describing a thing he witnessed. But here's the question everyone asked: why now? Why speak up only now? The man had stayed silent at first. He and Pankey had grown close. He felt like talking would be a betrayal. But after the first trial collapsed, he couldn't carry it anymore. So he came forward, and he told the court what he heard. This time, the jury did not deadlock. The verdict came down: guilty of felony murder, guilty of kidnapping, guilty of false reporting to authorities. And that conviction carried one outcome: life in prison, his earliest possible parole, the year 2042. By then, Stephen Pankey would be in his 90s. For practical purposes, he would not walk free again. Before the sentence was handed down, the family was allowed to speak. Jonelle's sister stood first. She had done the math: 12,634 days. That's how long her sister had been gone. She spoke about a life that never happened, a husband who never met her, a nephew who never met his aunt. Then her father stood, and he chose his words carefully. He told Pankey he had become a prisoner of his own mind. And then he did something unexpected. He offered him a path. He told Pankey it was not too late to confess, to make it right. A measured kind of mercy from the man with the most reason to withhold it. Jonelle's mother did not offer the same. She said plainly, she could not forgive how her daughter was killed, that this was evil. And then Pankey himself spoke. Given the last word, he did what he had always done. He claimed he was innocent. He said this was not justice for Jonelle. The man who could never stop talking, talked right to the end. So let's close where it counts. It took 35 years to find Jonelle Matthews. It took 37 years to convict the man who took her. And in the end, this case was not cracked by a lab. There was no DNA, no weapon, no fingerprint. It was solved by the one thing the killer could never control, his own voice. No DNA, no weapon. He was caught because he never stopped talking. We've got more cases just like this one, killers undone by their own words, and we break a new one down every single week. Subscribe now, and ask yourself one thing before you go. If Stephen Pankey had simply stayed silent, would Jonelle ever have come home?